No one thinks anything about seeing someone snapping a pic with a smartphone these days. But what do people think when they see someone photographing a landscape with a huge camera and a giant lens on a tripod? I'm often asked if I'm shooting for a magazine. I think this is something that's not often thought of, but think about it. Today, everyone's taking photos with a camera that's conveniently tucked away in their pocket. It's no wonder why a large camera and lens draw so much attention. Indeed, it's out of the norm. It's not mainstream. With pics being plastered all over social media, everyone's become desensitized with mundane images. However, every now and then, we see an image that blows our hair back. The kind of image that one considers superb or let's say professional or magazine-worthy. I think it's the psychology behind it. People see a huge camera far less often than they see a tiny phone. It's the perception that the camera is what makes all the difference. I mean, why else would someone choose to lug a heavy camera up a hillside when they could use their smartphone? However, the truth is that anyone with a phone can take a great photograph. But rather than use a cell phone, most landscape photographers, they choose to use a camera that better suits their needs for the type of photography that they're doing. However, a landscape photographer with even the smallest amount of experience knows that there's more to a photograph than just a camera. So let's talk about the landscape photographer versus the tourist or the novelist. What's the difference? Now, I should preface this with the fact that we've all been beginners at some point. I certainly don't mean any disrespect to anyone just starting out. Indeed, in the beginning, I can remember thinking many of these things myself. Basically, 4 things separate a landscape photographer from a tourist or a novice. So let's talk about the first one, the training. One thing that separates a landscape photographer from a tourist is the time they've spent educating themselves in the art of photography. Learning the exposure triangle, for example, it allows a photographer to transform a scene into art. Landscape photographers understand the importance of light, and they know how to use the aperture and shutter speed to make the photograph the way they saw it in the mind's eye. The novice understands light, but lacks the experience to appreciate its power. The novice allows the camera to make decisions with little or no thought of the consequences of things like a higher ISO or the lack of sharpness from a slow shutter speed while shooting handheld. Even the techniques used to hold the camera itself make a significant difference in sharpness. These are just a few points, but they take time to learn. Moreover, they require a willingness to invest not only the time, but the energy necessary to truly learn how to deploy these skills so they become second nature. On that note, gear is second on the list. A landscape photographer's already been there. They've already done that. In short, they've already suffered and have now developed a slight immunity to gas, also known as gear acquisition syndrome. Although no one is truly ever really cured from gas, we all suffer from it. Nevertheless, if you're new to landscape photography, it's easy to get lost in the gear. There are so many gadgets, camera options, diverse lenses on the market. Truly, it's just overwhelming. Of course, the common rebuttal to this statement is that a seasoned landscape photographer spent many years collecting their gear, and now they want to tell everyone else they don't need it. Believe me, I understand the quest for gear, but what comes with gear acquisition is a good understanding of what gear is value added and what gear is not. A landscape photographer uses gear to make a photograph. A novice finds a use for gear. Landscape photographers know it's not the gear that makes the photograph, but the photographer. When it comes to gear, I think most landscape photographers, they're just simply compelled to share their successes and failures in a genuine attempt to help others prevent making the same mistakes. Number 3 on the list is planning. Planning is a subject not fun, and it's not often things that we talk about, but when you think about it, and in my experience, I achieve far greater results having planned an image as opposed to a spur-of-the-moment approach. Indeed, there's a reason why people make photographs. There's something we're trying to capture. Maybe it's a moment in time, a memory, or something unique, but there's a reason. When one begins to get serious about landscape photography, one starts to visualize the image in the mind's eye. It's no longer good enough to just take a photograph. We want to make one. Getting up at noon and deciding to grab the camera and head over to the local park, it's something we've all done, and there's nothing wrong with that. And sometimes I still do it. But when I want to make a photograph, I begin planning and researching. Not only the composition, but the weather, the season, the time of day, the light, and its direction are of the utmost importance. Indeed, it's planning and research that makes the difference. Keep in mind that a tourist kind of takes an image. A landscape photographer, they make a photograph. And this may sound like a play on words, but it's not. There's a fundamental difference between making a photograph and taking one. Indeed, I often visualize the final print. Now, don't get me started in printing, but I will say there's just something to be said about printing one's work. It's like the final piece of the puzzle. In fact, if you don't print your work, I highly suggest giving it a shot. On that note, if you're interested, check out my video on why you should print your photography. I'll leave a link to that in the end of the video description. Now take a look at this photo. I planned and researched this trip based on the amount of rain, the time of year, the time of day, and many other factors. The water level, visibility of the rocks in the foreground, color were all forethoughts. I live about 6 hours away from the Ozark National Forest in Arkansas, and I didn't want to leave anything to chance. Nevertheless, despite a year-long plan, I still came up short. I needed more flowing water, but too much water may have covered the rocks in the foreground. In the past, I had envisioned a landscape orientation, but when I got there, I thought about switching it up to a portrait orientation. In addition to the time and place, I needed the right gear, a circular polarizer to remove the glare from the water. I brought a 3-stop ND filter to make sure that I had the right shutter speed to create the effect of motion in the water. On that note, motion blur in the leaves was also a problem and a consideration. And the right footwear to wade the creek without slipping and falling down so that I could place my tripod in the perfect position. Truly, I've been to this location many times, attempting to frame up a composition that truly meets the vision that I have in the mind's eye. Although I've made several images, I've not quite achieved my goal. The point is, there was a plan with a deliberate attempt to make a photograph. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like this image. In fact, I like it a lot, but I know it could be better. So I'll return again and again until that photograph meets the vision that I have in the mind's eye. Indeed, it's persistence and determination that separate a landscape photographer from a tourist or a beginner. Now, let me know what you think about this image in the comments. But regardless of what you think about it, just imagine, how would it compare to a similar image taken by a typical tourist trying to capture the essence of this waterfall? Close your eyes and visualize that photograph. What do you think it would look like? Regardless of the outcome, in my experience, planning yields far better results compared to spontaneously showing up and hoping for the best. Lastly, let's talk about experience. All the things I've already mentioned are derived from hard lessons learned, missed opportunities, failures, and successes. Yes, like you, I too am a graduate from the School of Hard Knocks. Regardless of how much or how fast we want to get somewhere, experience takes time. However, there's a way to mitigate the long, tedious process of acquiring experience, but that involves learning the lesson of others. Indeed, I think YouTube's a fantastic place to do just that. There are so many great photographers on YouTube with a knack for storytelling, far better than I. Indeed, YouTube is a very unique place. We can do more than just read and listen. We can watch these amazing stories and partake in the lessons learned, which in turn can certainly help reduce the amount of time that it takes to get where we're going. There's never been a time in history when we've had so much information so readily available. And I say, let's take advantage of it. I hope you found this video useful. You may like my video on how to choose the best camera for landscape photography. Also, remember to check out my video on printing. I'll post links in the video description. If you like this video though, hit that like button and consider subscribing. And as always, if I don't see you down the road, maybe I'll see you somewhere out on the trail.